In the winter of 1942, two massive war machines collided inside a single Soviet city. By the time the guns fell silent 5 months later, nearly 2 million people were dead, wounded, or missing. To understand how so many died in one place, we have to look back to the previous year. The German invasion of the Soviet Union had stalled just outside Moscow. Desperate for fuel, Adolf Hitler ordered his army south to capture the Caucasus oil fields. Standing between the advancing army and those vital resources was an industrial center on the Volga River, Stalingrad. This strategic military pivot was now colliding with a psychological obsession that would derail the German offensive and change the direction of the war. For Hitler, capturing Stalingrad was an irresistible prize. The city bore the name of his greatest rival. Taking it meant a deeply personal, symbolic blow. For Joseph Stalin, losing the city was unthinkable. He ordered his army to defend the territory at all costs. Retreat was strictly forbidden. Hundreds of miles away from the front line, these two commanders drew lines on paper, demanding absolute victory in a tiny geographic bottleneck. The refusal of both men to yield ground turned a city of steel and concrete into a massive funnel, drawing in millions of soldiers. In August 1942, Germany's Sixth Army reached the city limits. Within days, the Luftwaffe dropped thousands of bombs, reducing the urban landscape to absolute rubble. The devastation was meant to clear a path, but it created an entirely new problem for the attackers. German tanks could not maneuver through mountains of shattered concrete and steel. The ruined environment actively protected the Soviet defenders. The conflict rapidly devolved into what German soldiers called Roten Krieg, rat war. Massive operations shrank to claustrophobic firefights over basements, sewers, and single rooms. The highly mechanized German military lost all of its technological advantages. They were forced off their vehicles and into the dirt. While the dictators demanded total conquest of the city, the soldiers on the ground spent weeks bleeding out to capture a few yards of a destroyed factory floor. The ruins offered perfect concealment. Soviet snipers like Vasily Zaitsev turned the debris into hunting grounds, picking off German officers and shattering morale. As the death toll climbed, leadership on both sides simply funneled more troops into the city to replace the fallen. By late November, the German army controlled almost all of Stalingrad, yet the objective of securing the region had vanished entirely. The battle was running purely on the inertia of commanders refusing to look away. In November 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus, a massive counteroffensive, bypassing the hardened German corps to strike weaker Romanian and Hungarian units guarding the flanks. Within 4 days, the two arms met. Nearly 300,000 men of the German Sixth Army were completely cut off. A breakout was still possible, but Hitler flatly refused to authorize a retreat. He ordered his men to hold their ground, promising them the Luftwaffe would deliver enough food and ammunition by air to keep them fighting. That promise was a mathematical impossibility. The German army was now locked inside the exact same urban cage they had spent 3 months destroying. Inside the pocket, the temperature plummeted. Food and ammunition ran out. Men were consumed by frostbite and starvation, eventually eating their own pack horses to survive another week in the freezing rubble. Knowing the end was near, Hitler promoted the Sixth Army's commander, Friedrich Paulus, to field marshal. Since no German field marshal had ever been taken alive, the promotion was an unstated demand for suicide. Paulus defied the order. On January 31, 1943, he surrendered. Of the 300,000 men trapped in the city, roughly 91,000 survived long enough to surrender. They were stripped of their weapons and marched across the frozen wasteland toward Soviet prison camps. The brutal environment and the sheer, relentless volume of the Soviet counterattack finally snapped the spine of a military force that had seemed invincible. The numbers left in the wake of the battle are difficult to comprehend. Out of the 91,000 Germans taken prisoner that winter, only about 5,000 would live long enough to return home. Across both sides, the fighting claimed nearly 2 million casualties. Before this point, Germany dictated the pace of the Second World War. Afterward, Their forces in the east were permanently pushed onto the defensive, fighting a long, continuous retreat all the way back to Berlin. The moment the war in Europe slipped out of Hitler's hands for good was bought with an ocean of blood. It was a turning point paid for by the uncompromising egos of two men, fighting over a city that had been bombed completely off the map.